Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Casual Comic Fans. I am Mike from Comic Book Fans, and as usual, I'm joined from Luke from Casual Experts.
Hi, everyone.
And today, we are talking about the first two episodes of the new Disney Plus series, Loki.
Yeah.
Now, it's been pretty interesting so far. I am definitely a sucker for time travel stuff, so I am definitely enjoying this, and I like where they're going with Loki's character. Like, it's very interesting how it's basically Loki from, the 2012 Avengers film.
Right.
He did, when the show started, he didn't have all the character development that we have seen over the years. Like, I think some major events happened in, like, Thor: The Dark World and Thor: Ragnarok that really, I think helped develop his personality more to the point where he's more of, like, kind of a rogue or an anti-hero than like a villain by Infinity War. And then in Infinity War we have a major development in his story where he friggin' dies.
Yes.
So we, obviously he doesn't have all that when we first pick up in this Loki series. So that was kind of interesting to see. I think they did a good job just kind of picking up where Loki left off in the first Avengers film.
Yeah.
I think Tom Hiddleston did a good job acting. He kind of acting different than he has been in the last few movies.
Right.
This whole time variance authority thing is pretty interesting. What do you think about all that stuff? They dropped quite a few major like bombshells and backstory for like basically the whole time stream in Marvel movies.
Right. I think it's really interesting. They basically in that kind of Hanna-Barbera style of like video in the first episode, they kind of explained that there was essentially a Secret Wars type thing that happened.
Yeah.
At some point earlier, and the Time Variance Authority basically shut that down, and they created one sacred timeline. Basically meaning that up until this point, there hasn't really been a multiverse, at least not in the way that we were thinking it was.
Yeah.
One thing that was really fun is that Miss Minutes is played by Tara Strong, and if you've seen any DC animated movie, she was probably in it. She's voiced a lot of characters.
Yeah, she's I think most famous for doing Harley Quinn.
Yes.
Because I think she was the first voice of Harley Quinn, because Harley Quinn was invented for the animated Batman series.
Right.
And I'm pretty sure she was, the voice of her in that, so she kind of was the original Harley Quinn in a way.
Right, and I think she also does Raven on Teen Titans on the cartoons.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I found the whole like sacred time stream concept very interesting.
Right.
Because it kind of goes against pretty much everything in the comics, like not just DC, but even Marvel. There's usually some sort of multiverse in these comics. In the comics, obviously you have like the Ultimate Universe with the Ultimates and a bunch of other alternate universe, characters and worlds and stuff. That's always been kind of a thing. Like the main Marvel universe is 616, and you have all these other things. So this idea of a one sacred timeline is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And I suppose to a certain extent it makes sense, because I feel like maybe if there was a multiverse this whole time, we might have seen more, evidence of that throughout the last, like 10, 12 years. And it really put things into perspective a little bit. Especially that one scene where, what's his face? I forget his name, but he basically had like a bunch of Infinity Stones in his like portable desk or whatever. Yeah, and said like some of the guys use them as like paperweights and stuff. And I know some people online were almost kind of taking that and being like, wow, like the whole Infinity Saga was over some paperweights, but it's kind of the other way around. It's more like the Time Variance Authority is so big and above everything else that like the Infinity Stones, even though they're insanely powerful, are just like paperweights to them.
Right.
I liked how they really deconstructed Loki's character. In the first episode, the way Owen Wilson's character Mobius basically just kind of sat him down and just, it was almost like kind of like Loki was being himself, having all these ideas, and Mobius was like, well, actually, it's because of this. And by the end, after Loki saw like all the things that happened to him and how he dies and how he really never gets to be this conqueror that he thinks he should be.
Right.
He realized, he even says basically that like he hurts people because, deep down he knows he's really weak and he's trying to pretend to be more powerful than he is.
Right.
And I thought that was very interesting and really kind of brought in even more depth to Loki's character.
I think it's also interesting that not all time travel is considered like bad in this eyes
Right.
of the TVA. Like Avengers Endgame was supposed to happen,
Right.
and I thought that was very interesting. But I feel
Yeah.
like Captain America maybe goes back and changes too much, and so I feel
Yeah.
like they might come back to that point later on in the show. I'm not sure, but I
Maybe.
feel like that was kind of a big thing.
Right. Like, I think the main reason, like, I could just be spitballing, but I think one of the main reasons that what the Avengers did was okay was because they made sure they brought back the Infinity Stones to where they needed to be.
Right.
You know, where Captain America in the end did that, so they made sure they didn't make any more branching timelines.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's probably why, because they technically did preserve the sacred timeline. But
Yeah.
what you said about
Yeah.
Cap,
Yeah.
because I think even the Russo brothers said that when Cap did that, he made like a branching timeline.
Right. Right.
So maybe they'll bring that back, or maybe that old Cap is a variant, and the Time Variance Authority already took care of him behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, I am enjoying Owen Wilson's character.
Yeah.
Like, he's not like the classic Owen Wilson. Like, he's enough Owen Wilson to be like, oh, it's Owen Wilson, but he's not like how he usually is in his comedy movies and stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's good.
But yeah, and then in the second episode, we actually get to see Loki go on some missions. And we
Right.
actually get to see this, variant, which is apparently another version of him in action.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes me wonder, like, how does that work? Because Mobius talks about how, there's all these different, like, variants of Loki and how they vary so differently.
Right.
But what makes them vary? Because if there's the one sacred timeline, like, at some point, like, something they did, makes everything branch off. And I'm assuming something they did makes them change.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can there be, like, they showed like almost like a Hulk Loki or something,
Yeah.
and stuff like that, and later we see there's like kind of a female Loki, so it's like how exactly did the timeline change so much to change them,
Yeah. I think that maybe that could have been like, these are all the Lokis that we've encountered before, and essentially stop their timeline. That might have been kind of that kind of thing. But you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Maybe they'll explain that later. Maybe it's just like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking too hard about it, but
I do think that by the end of this, they're going to open the multiverse again. I feel like that's kind of what's going to happen.
I feel like, yeah, I definitely like it's quite clear that this show is going to lead into Spider-Man No Way Home and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Right.
Which is surprising. I kind of expected WandaVision to do that.
Yeah.
And it didn't really, So, like, and obviously the Falcon and the Winter Soldier didn't really have any of that in there. So
Yeah.
this show seems like it's going to actually have the most effect on the MCU going forward, which I did not expect.
Right.
Like you said, there's got to be something by the end of this series where, the sacred timeline ends up like not being restored, and that makes everything all fragile.
Right.
And that, because I've heard a lot of stuff about how, like, in No Way Home, all the multiverse stuff that happens is because, like, the timeline is unstable and Doctor Strange is trying to, like, clean it up and stuff, and that's like part of what happens in the Multiverse of Madness.
Yeah. Okay.
And also, I think that Kang might be kind of like being set up by this series as well.
Yeah.
Kang the
Yeah.
Conqueror, because he was a major, like, opponent of the TVA in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
And I know he's supposed to appear in Ant-Man and the Wasp 3, or the third Ant-Man movie, Quantumania or whatever.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because he is kind of like it does make me more interested in that movie.
Right.
But Kang is like one of the big bads of Marvel. He's kind of up there with like Thanos, Doctor Doom, and Galactus, and they're these like the ones that is like a huge opponent for the Avengers. Because he's always messing with the timeline. There's like a bunch of different like alternate versions of him.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of wondering why he's like an Ant-Man villain, unless he's just introduced in that movie and then goes on to do other stuff.
That's what I'm thinking.
I kind of hope so, because I feel like if they're not going to have Doctor Doom or Galactus be like the main villain of this phase of the Marvel movies, it has to be Kang, because he's such a major force in the comics. But anyway, yeah, at the very end of the second episode, we see that Loki, this technically more powerful variant of Loki, is actually it seems like a female version of Loki, which was not a surprise to me. I don't know if it was to you.
Yeah, it wasn't. We've been speculating for a while that that's what's going to happen.
Right. There were set photos that were released like a year ago.
Yeah.
That showed a female Loki, and I think we even knew who the actress was.
Yeah.
And people were like, "Oh, is that female Loki?" So I was like, "Oh, wow, what a surprise!" It does seem like this version, like a lot of people are saying, like, "Oh, she's actually Enchantress," but I think she's a mix of Enchantress and like female Loki, because we've seen female, like we've seen Loki take the form of a woman in the past.
Yeah.
In more recent comics, and then Enchantress is obviously like, I don't know a whole lot of her origin, but I'm pretty sure she's like in a lot of the Thor comics.
Yeah, she's a more classic Thor villain. Yeah.
Yeah, Enchantress is kind of like your more classic sorcerer type person, and I think she and Loki team up quite a bit in the comics.
Yeah.
So it seems like they are kind of combining like a female Loki with Enchantress, which is interesting.
Yeah, I think they're gonna call her by Enchantress's name, whatever that is, instead of having there be two Lokis.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. She even said like, "Don't call me Loki" at some point, you know.
Right.
One problem I had with this was, for some reason, like when whatever her name is, you know, female Loki took over that one guy's body in the store.
Yeah.
And started fighting Loki. Mm-hmm. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because in previous movies, you know, he's still technically Asgardian or, you know, Frost Giant, whatever.
Right.
In previous movie, he has fought people and like held his own, because technically he is stronger than like just a normal person.
Right.
Like he and Cap fought in the first Avengers movie, and even though Cap is like basically an enhanced super soldier, he wasn't really able to like severely hurt Loki, at least not when in their short scrap, you know.
Right.
So it's like, how can this like this? I mean, unless somehow Enchantress, or, you know, this Loki, female Loki Enchantress character, unless she like somehow powers up people when she possesses them.
And it also might have been that Loki, because Loki might not at that point have known that this person was magical. I'm not remembering exactly, but maybe he was just kind of underestimating his opponent. I don't know.
Yeah, that's possible too. I did want to talk a little bit about kind of comparing it to the comics a little bit, because they bring in a lot of elements from the comics that are kind of obscure. But before we do that, let's talk about episode 3. This was totally always supposed to be part of the video, and it's not that I just took forever to edit the last video or anything. No. But anyway, so yeah, there wasn't actually a whole lot to talk about in episode 3. I mean, it was, a lot of stuff did happen, but it was mostly character building and character development of Loki and Sylvie, which is the name of the female Loki Enchantress character, apparently. And like Luke said, it does seem like they are using Enchantress's name, but it's like more of a newer version of the character. Her name is Sylvie, and she isn't as an Asgardian. She got her powers from somewhere else, so they're just kind of mixing it all together, where it's like she's got Enchantress's powers. They even talk about her enchanting people several times, but then she looks like Loki, and she got like a version of Loki's suit, even with like little horn, and you know, her name's Sylvie. So it's just kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of different characters. But so we learn a little bit more about her. Not a whole lot. We learn a little bit more about Loki. Apparently he's bisexual, which was really important to his character. Yeah, the rest of the episode wasn't a whole lot of advancement of the story. I think the main reveals, the main takeaways from this episode are that apparently the TVA agents weren't actually made by the TVA. Sylvie said that they were all variants. So that's interesting. Oh, and one last thing. Apparently, Loki has frickin' telekinesis. Who knew? To kind of stop a building from falling with his mind. That's new. But yeah, that's pretty much the only takeaways here that I can remember. You know, we got to see a little more character development with Loki. We got to see Sylvie in action. She's kind of kicks ass. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Back to the original video. But anyway, going back to the comics. So Mobius is a character in the comics. Very obscure. I didn't really know about him until this show.
Right.
But he's actually not an agent of the TVA. He's actually like one of the judges.
Yeah.
So he's one of like the higher ups in the comics. Also, another thing with the TVA is like we talked about earlier, they totally made up the whole like sacred timeline thing.
Yeah.
The TVA never does that. They basically just try to minimize the amount of like, you know, fractures to time and reality as possible.
Yeah.
Whilst the multiverse still exists. And you really don't get to see them much. Like, as far as my research, there's only like, you only see like a few different storylines. You know, where there's like a few different characters, especially with She-Hulk for some reason, getting tried for certain like time-related crimes and stuff, and what have you. And I think one time the Fantastic Four was involved, but
that would make sense.
They're not super, you know, I thought they were pretty obscure, and like I looked into it, and like, yeah, even in the comics they really aren't that. Not a whole lot happens with them besides the fact that they usually battle with Kang for jurisdiction.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're not like super all powerful like they are in this show. Which, yeah, also the Timekeepers were technically created by the TVA in the comics, not the other way around.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, like, at the end of time, the last leader of the TVA created the Timekeepers. He accidentally made, like, I think, like, I forget what they're called, like the Time Splicers or something, and then they're, like, an evil version, and then there's, like, the Timekeepers, which are a good version. I don't know, it's confusing and not really worth, like, going into, but, but, yeah, all you need to know is basically the Timekeepers weren't the ones that created the TVA in the comics.
Right.
And I think that's led some people to think that the Timekeepers don't actually exist. That they're like a facade.
Right.
And there's some like twist coming with like what the TVA actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And last little thing, there is that one character, Judge... Crap, what's her name?
Renslayer?
Yeah, Judge Renslayer. She, in the comics, was... At least that... It's like a character of the same name was... Kang's wife for a while.
Right.
She was basically like from the 40th century, some princess, and like Kang took over her, you know, her country or planet, whatever. And he spared her because, I don't know, basically she was hot and he wanted to smash, you know?
Right,
So
right.
it's basically, so she ended up marrying him, and yeah, that's pretty much it. She doesn't really have a whole lot of other stuff going on, but I don't think she was ever part of the TVA in the comics, so that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
They obviously brought a lot of elements from the comics and then changed a lot of it.
Right.
Which is to be expected.
Mm-hmm.
And so far it looks like female Loki and Loki are like going to be working together.
Yeah, that's what it would seem like.
I feel like by the end they're going to have like a showdown and he's going to, you know, not side with her.
Yeah, they're going to have a laser battle in the sky.
Oh, God. Let's hope not. It would actually be more interesting to have, like, Mysterio-type battle, you know, because Loki can, you know, project things, you know, and images. That would be kind of cool to see him actually do something cool besides stab people.
Yeah.
You know? But we'll see. But I'm definitely looking forward to seeing how this pans out.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and check out the links in the description for our Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and we just came out with a new podcast as well, so you can check that out in the description. And that's everything, and we will see you next time. Peace out.
Peace out, guys.